Hello everyone, this is Julia from the Paintbox Letters, and thank you so much for joining me for this painting tutorial. Today I am going to be painting a cosmos flower against the sky for the Aloha 23 palette January challenge called Touch the Sky. So before we get started, I'll let you know what materials you need if you'd like to paint along or use this as a guide to help you with a painting of your own. So I have my paper and my flower drawn out. So the idea is that there will be a field of flowers down here. I have a faint pencil line you probably won't be able to see. It's the horizon line, the sky, and a flower reaching up for the sky. So my paper is taped down. You will need watercolor paints. So I have my paints here. And for the challenge, I will only be using the colors from this month's palette, which is this really dark dusky purple, opera pink, pale blue, night dive, and Naples yellow or Pakalana. So those are the colors that I'll be using today. I have my brushes. I will likely be using a size 2 and a size 6. These are silver limited black velvet brushes. They hold a lot of water. It's possible that when I get to the flower for the fine detail, I'll switch to a different brush, possibly the, let me see if I have one right here, Artegria round brushes, because they hold a lot less water in the tip and it's easier to do details that way. And then I have my water. And finally, the big thing that I'll be using today is masking fluid. I'll be putting masking fluid on the flowers so that I can paint a nice smooth background without worrying about color getting onto my flower. So let's go ahead and get started. It took me, I am no expert on masking fluid, and it's taking me quite some time to figure out how to use it properly. So masking fluid tends to become quite thick. So if you can see it here, it's very thick, but when we put it down on the paper, we want just the thinnest layer of masking fluid. So I'm going to add a little bit of water to the masking fluid to thin it out. Now sometimes, well, usually I just add some water and give it a good shake, but because I want you to see the consistency, I'm mixing it here on this little bowl. So I'm just going to work that in. And this is a brush that I use only for masking fluid. It's a fairly inexpensive brush. I think I got it from Jerry's Art Supply online. And when I'm done with it, I'm going to give it a very good cleaning. So now the consistency of this masking fluid is much more like water, which is what I want. What I'm going to do is just brush it onto the areas of the flower where I don't want the paint. Now the other thing that I have learned about masking fluid is that it dries very quickly. And once it starts to dry, you don't want to go over that area again, because it will pull and lift the masking fluid off the paper before you're ready for it to come off. So I work in chunks. So this area has already started to dry, so I'm going to come over to the other side and put some down over here. And then I'll work this area. So you'll notice, I mean, I'm sure it's not noticeable right now on the camera, but you'll see when it's starting to dry and you don't want to run your brush over that area again. The other thing to remember when using masking fluid is that patience is very necessary. I tend to be quite impatient with my paintings, and I force things to dry using a hair dryer. And that is definitely not something you want to do if you're using masking fluid in your painting, because the heat causes the masking fluid to kind of stick more to your paper, and you risk ripping your paper when you take the masking fluid off. So from an angle, I can see that this area is just about dry, so I should be safe to come over here and add a bit more to some that I didn't get before it started to get tacky. So as it dries, it's kind of has a slight cream color to it, so you'll be able to see what areas you went over already and what areas you missed. All right, I think that I have covered my flower here pretty thoroughly. I think I missed a spot right over here. All right, so now I'm gonna let this dry completely. And while I let it dry, I'm gonna go clean this brush as thoroughly as possible because if you leave the masking fluid on here, it will just become a clumpy mess. And you can already see some clumps in it from the masking fluid that's already dried while I've been working. All right, so I will be back. Before we move on to the next painting step, I just wanted to give you a closer look at the dry masking fluid. So it's dry, it's not tacky, nothing is coming up when I touch it. So we are ready to move on to the painting. Okay, so I am now all set up and ready to get started on this piece. So I want it to be daylight. So the first thing I'm gonna do, because I want some wispy clouds in the sky. Sorry, I'm cleaning my brush because apparently I didn't do a very good job of it before my last painting, or after my last painting, I should say. Okay, so what I'm gonna do is I am going to work wet on wet. So I'm using a larger brush. This is a size 10 to wet the entire area. And the nice part about using masking fluid is I don't have to worry about the flower. It can just paint right over it. Okay, so my sky area is now completely wet. And I'm gonna work first with the pale blue. Get my brush is completely saturated. This is directly out of the pan. So we're gonna create a nice, actually I'm gonna water down the color just a little bit. And create just this little wispy summer sky. So I love, absolutely love cosmos flowers. They're one of my favorites, and they remind me of a very specific time in my life. I just put a little bit of Pakalana on my brush, and I'm gonna mix it in with some of the pale blue, just a little, to give my sky a little more depth and range of color. So it reminds me of when I lived in Seoul, South Korea. My family, my kids, my husband and I, we lived there for about, I want to say 3.5 years-ish. And we lived right in Seoul in a beautiful villa overlooking the Han River. And we were across the river from Yeouido Park. Yeouido is a little, like, almost like a tiny little island in the river, or by the river in Seoul. And in the summer, late summer, there would just be fields and fields of cosmos. And I could see the pink from our window. It was so beautiful. And then of course, I love taking the kids to see the flowers. All right, so that's my first layer. And it's very just, you know, really wherever you want the color. Very wispy summer sky. And now, because I cannot use heat to dry this, it has to air dry, which is also why I'm not doing this as a live tutorial on Instagram and have recorded it for you. So I'll see you again once this is dry and we can move on to the next layer. Hi, so we are back for a second layer, which is up to you if you want to keep it kind of soft and wispy, or if you would like to add a bit more color. I'm going to add just a little more in some area, or probably overall actually, to this piece. And now I'm working wet on dry. For me, adding additional layers of color just gives more depth to the painting. And it doesn't, I don't think it matters quite as much in a painting like this, but for galaxies or paintings that are much more saturated, it does make a significant difference if you have layers upon layers of color. If you've watched my nebula tutorial that is on this same channel, on the Aloha Studios channel, you'll see that I do like 7, 8 layers of color to get that, that depth and the vibrant colors that you want in a galaxy painting. So it looks like I may have missed a small spot right here with my masking fluid, but it'll be okay. Sorry, that beeping noise was my humidifier letting me know that it's out of water. All right, now I am just going to mix in the tiniest bit of opera pink to the pale blue, and it'll be a very, very light purple color. Just for a little bit more depth to some of the darker areas. Okay, so that is my second layer of color, and we're gonna let that dry. So I'll be back once that's dry. So we're back to work on the bottom half of the painting, or I guess the bottom like quarter of the painting. My sky is done, and so for the bottom part, I'd like for it to be a field of cosmos flowers, but they're further away, so they're gonna have kind of a blurry effect to them to make them look as if they're further away. So the flowers are going to be primarily pink, but to make it look more natural, I want there to be variations of color, of pink tones. So to get that blurry effect easily, I'm going to take a clean brush and wet the bottom of this paper. Right. So I want to make sure that there isn't too much water because I want the paint to spread, but I don't want it to spread too much. So really just kind of want it to be damp down here. All right. So I'm going to go in. This is Opera Pink mixed with a bit of Pakalana, or the Naples yellow. And with the background, or with, since I'm doing wet on wet, the color is going to spread on its own. So now I'm adding a bit more of the Opera Pink to the mix that I already have. And we're working on getting variations of pink into my field. I'm adding a little bit of pale blue. And as you'll notice, as the paper dries, my spreads of color, dots of paint, are spreading less and less, which is fine. But I do want to work pretty quickly. And then I'm now using the Night Dive, which is a rich kind of emerald green color, but it's a bit too dark for the green that I would like, so I mixed it with a little bit of the Pakalana, the Naples yellow, to kind of soften the color a bit. And I'm going to fill in some areas of green. Now the paper has dried quite a bit, so it's not spreading. And so I'm going to re-wet it. And this is where the advantage of Keiko's particular blend of Opera Pink comes in handy, because it's a staining color. And so it's not going to lift off the paper when I re-wet it. So before I move on from that step, I'm just going to add a little bit of highlight here and there. All right, so we're back, and I've moved in a little bit closer so you can have a better look at what we're going to be working on next. So the next step is to lift off the masking fluid. Now I am using a rubber cement eraser, which works beautifully to take off masking fluid. So I'm just gently taking off, and this is such a thin little layer, and that's all you need to protect that area from paint. And as I mentioned earlier, I missed a spot right there. So we're going to see what we can do about fixing it. So I'm just putting some water on the area where I don't want that paint. And now with a clean Q-tip, I'm going to dab and lift it off. It's not a perfect solution, but it works, and we're just going to be going over it with color anyway. So there we go. So there is my area that I'm going to paint now. So I'm switching over to a smaller brush. This is a size 2, and I'm going to use my dark emerald green color and mix it with just a little bit of the Naples yellow to soften it a little bit. All right. So I'm starting with a darker green at the top and getting a little lighter as I go down. Okay, so then we're now moving to the flower, and the Naples yellow isn't quite as bright yellow as I would like it to be, but since we're working with a limited palette, we're just gonna go with it. I'm trying to now make a mix of some Naples yellow with just a hint of opera pink to brighten that color just a tiny bit. So it's really not much brighter, but it has a little more to work with. So that is the center of my cosmos. Now for the petals. So the opera pink is quite bright, dark in color. So I'm watering it down quite a bit, and I'm just going to fill in my petals with a nice light coat of pink. I'm being careful not to get too close to my center because I don't think that's the flower center is quite dry yet. Just going to fill the entire flower in for the time being with this light shade of pink. All right, so now comes the fun part, and that is adding some depth and color to the flower. So we want a bit of a darker pink center. I'm going to adjust this camera for you so you can see it from a better angle. Okay, so I'm going to pull some of that color out. Oh, in the time that it took for me to adjust the camera, my paint has dried. All right, so we're going to give this a little bit of time to dry before moving on. Okay, so I'm now switching over to a different brush. Let's see, you can see this. This is an Artigria Intuition size 0 round brush. It's a pretty small point, but most importantly, it does not hold as much water as the black velvet, and that is pretty necessary for the detail work that I'll be doing. So this is I mixed in a little bit more opera pink so that I could have a slightly darker shade. So now we're going to move on to the center of this flower. Oh, and what I need is a brown. But since this set does not include a brown, I'm going to mix some colors in an attempt to make my own. So let's see how close I can get. All right, so now that this piece is just about done, I'm just going to add a little bit of detail to make it a little more cosmos-like. And now for the always satisfying tape peel. So here is my finished piece for today. I hope you enjoyed the tutorial, and I hope that you will join Keiko and me for the Aloha 23 Palette Challenge over on Instagram. If you were not able to join us this month, there's another challenge coming up next month that Keiko will be having with a different guest artist. Thanks again. See you next time. Bye.